Ethan Carter wakes up on a peaceful morning, with the sound of a gentle alarm clock ringing, a stark contrast to previous times when he faced the noise and stress of a stressful life. The morning light crept through the curtains, forming soft streaks of light on the wooden floor, giving him a rare sense of peace. He sat up, his feet touching the cold floor, and took a deep breath. Today will be a different day, he told himself. There was no busy schedule, no calls from reporters or sponsors, just him and the time to regain the peace he had lost during his years at the height of his fame. Ethan had long planned this trip, one that he hoped would bring tranquility to the soul. He did not inform anyone, not even his team or close friends, knowing that they would try to organize everything, making this trip noisy and full of attention. He chose a remote, unknown destination, where he could completely escape all the prying eyes and expectations of society. In contrast to his lavish life, that day he wore a simple tracksuit, a cap to hide his face, and did not want anyone to recognize him. He just wanted a normal trip, without any attention or intrusion into his personal space. When he entered the airport, although everything seemed normal, he couldn't help but feel the eyes of the people around him. Some glanced at him quickly, while others kept staring at him, as if trying to identify him. Ethan remained calm, pulled his cap low, and continued walking, concentrating on his journey. He tries to blend himself in with the crowd, not wanting to highlight himself, even though he knows that attention is always an inseparable part of the life of a celebrity like him. When Ethan arrived at the check-in counter, he handed his passport to the employee, but he immediately felt the person's gaze. The clerk didn't show surprise or recognize who he was, but just indifferently tapped her finger on the computer keyboard. Everything happened so fast, there was almost no exchange, just a nod and a simple sentence. First-class seats, windows. The clerk returned her boarding pass and didn't look at him again. Ethan didn't feel angry, but a strange feeling, a strangeness rose up in him. He thinks about the difference between what people see in him and the reality of his life. This trip, although it may seem like an evasion, contains deep thoughts about the price he has to pay as a legend. He was used to admiring eyes, words of praise, but now, in this moment, he felt like an invisible person in the crowd. As he passed through the security checkpoint, Ethan felt the distinction even more clearly. Everyone looked at him, some people recognized, some people just looked at him without realizing it. He felt like a person without privacy, without the freedom of ordinary people. Although he has lived in the world of aura, now he only wants to live like a normal person. He quietly walked toward the plane door, not wanting anyone to notice him, and realized that fame was sometimes a shirt that was too tight to take off. Ethan sat down in the first-class cabin, which he had chosen for its quietness and comfort. The feeling of a luxurious first-class cabin is what he needs to find some peace during stressful business trips. He looked out the window of the plane, the trucks loaded with luggage, the ground staff were busy. In the cabin, the atmosphere also began to become bustling with the sound of footsteps and the voices of passengers boarding the plane. Ethan sees himself as a small rock lost in the ocean, with no empathy or connection to anyone. As the plane began to take off, Ethan felt the peace of the surrounding space, but immediately, that gentle feeling was disturbed when he heard the voice of the flight attendant. "Excuse me, sir, can I see your ticket?" A simple question, but one with suspicion, as if she didn't believe in his presence in this first-class cabin. Ethan held up the ticket, his hand still calm, although he was a little uncomfortable in his heart. The flight attendant checked the ticket, and her eyes looked at him for a while longer than usual. After confirming, she returned the ticket with a reluctant smile. Ethan's mood turned tense. He knew that doubt was not the first time it had happened to him. This wasn't the first time he felt the look of judgment and discrimination. But today, in this cabin, this incident made him feel lost, like someone who didn't belong here. Ethan sat down, taking a deep breath to dispel the discomfort in his heart. The plane was steady in the air, but his mind was still spinning with messy thoughts. Although she was used to the eyes of the people around her, today everything seemed different. Feeling doubted and not accepted, he couldn't get out of the questions he asked himself. Why me? Why has everything become so strange? He wondered if his life was too complicated, or if it was this fame that made him a different person that even those around him couldn't see normally. The images of football matches, the times standing on the podium, all the achievements have become a thing of the past. He remembers the feeling of standing in front of thousands of fans, the applause, the cheers. But today, in this cabin, he is no longer a legend, but just a passenger like everyone else. These thoughts made him feel an empty loneliness, even though there were still people, noise, and life around him. Suddenly, that feeling was pushed back when the flight attendant approached, carrying a glass of water and a small towel. She smiled softly and placed the drink on the table in front of him. "Sir, if you need anything more, please don't hesitate to ask." Her words were simple, but they made Ethan feel like he had just been lifted out of an invisible abyss. Although it was a small act, that kindness made him realize that not everyone looked at him through the lens of fame. There are people who still treat him as a human being, not a legend. He lifted the glass of water, took a small sip, and felt the coolness in his throat. The taste of the filtered water was nothing special, but it made him feel more alert. Putting his eyes out the window, he watched the white clouds float by, feeling a little comfort in the peaceful scenery of the sky. However, the anxiety about change in oneself is still there. He couldn't help but wonder if he could continue to live in the shadow of the past. Are you losing yourself in your quest to find the perfect image that you don't really be? Unconsciously, he realized that, even though many things hadn't changed, he was still looking for something he had forgotten: freedom. Freedom is not praise, not admiring glances, but acceptance of yourself, even when no one sees who you are. The image of a celebrity is now just a mask for him, no longer himself. He was tired of that emptiness, with always having to live up to the expectations that others set for him. Ethan sighed, relaxed in the comfortable seat, and for the first time during the flight, he felt he really needed to think about the important things in his life, about what he really wanted. Not fame, not glorious matches, but peace of mind, the feeling of being yourself. He looked at the screen in front of him, which announced the plane's location, but his mind was somewhere else, where he didn't have to be the famous Ethan Carter. As the plane glides gently through the sky, Ethan feels things gradually calm down. His mind began to return to important questions. He still remembers the early days when his career was just beginning. At that time, everything was very simple. He only thinks about basketball, games, and the feeling of winning. The cheering crowds, the lights on the stage, it was all amazing. But now, when he is no longer standing on the field, he begins to realize the emptiness within him. He sat up straight, trying to regain his composure. His gaze stopped on the small panel on the arm of the chair. But his mind was no longer focused on the numbers or the information displayed. Instead, images of his family and loved ones appeared in his mind. The image of his mother, who always advises him to live simply and love everyone around him. He remembered the times when she cooked familiar dishes, and he just needed a normal meal, no fuss needed. But now, everything seems too complicated. He was no longer sure if he could return to that simple life. Ethan put down the glass of water and leaned back in his chair, looking up at the ceiling of the plane, trying to find an answer. The feeling of fatigue rises not only because of the long flights, but also because of the inner struggle that he cannot get rid of. It seemed that everything he had built up until now was collapsing, and he couldn't help but face himself. The eyes that he was used to, the compliments he had received now seemed to become the ropes, preventing him from moving on freely. A thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Had he lost himself in this race? Did the people around him only love his image, not the real person inside? He remembers old friends, people he once trusted, times when he could laugh carefree without worrying about fame. Now, he can't find those relationships again. Fame has made things distant, and he can't help but feel lonely. He turned to look out the window, where the white clouds continued to pass, as a symbol of drift, of what could not be held. Ethan wondered if he was like those clouds, constantly looking for a place to cling to but couldn't stop, couldn't stay in one place for a long time. He could only continue to drift away, unable to go back to the past, nor could he shape the future. When the feeling of emptiness became too strong, Ethan decided to get up and walk out into the narrow passageway. He felt he needed to do something to get rid of the pent-up tension in him. His footsteps were gentle but resolute, as if he was looking for a way out of the impasse in his soul. He made his way to the restroom area, where he could find some private space. When he closed the door, in that small space, Ethan faced himself in the mirror. He looked into his eyes, and for the first time he did not see the light of the winner, did not see the image of a legend. Instead, he sees fatigue, anxiety, the search for a new direction. A sense of helplessness arises, but it is also a turning point. He no longer wanted to run away. He needs to face himself. He needs to accept that it is not always possible to keep the image that others expect. Despite the difficulties, he knew that he had to find himself, to find a part of himself that he had forgotten all this time. Ethan stood in front of the mirror, his breathing quick and his heart pounding. He looked at his reflection, but couldn't recognize the man in it. The man he used to know, the one he had seen in every game, in every moment of victory. Now there was only one person left, tired, worried, and full of confusion. Every drop of sweat dripped down from his forehead, making him feel as if he couldn't get out of the tension that was enveloping him. Everything seemed to turn upside down in his head. He had spent his life chasing success, to become an icon. But now he stood here, in a closed room, facing loneliness and emotional deprivation. Titles, awards, honors, it was all like an invisible wall blocking the way, making him unable to move forward, unable to escape from his own shadow. He turned around, his trembling hands gripping the lavabo tightly. His thoughts were like a wave, constantly surging. What did I do wrong? Ethan wondered. Why can't victories bring a sense of satisfaction? Why do you feel like you're always missing something important, even though everything you've ever dreamed of is already in your hands? His gaze turned to the window, where the sky was gray. It is an image in contrast to the glorious moments of the past, when he was always filled with light and admiration. But now, even the sunlight couldn't dispel the shadow he was living in. He felt lost in a journey without stopping, not knowing where to go, what to do to find himself. A thought suddenly popped into his mind. Had he forgotten the most important things in his life, the values he had believed in before he became famous? Will he be able to return to the simple life he once dreamed of, where there is no spotlight, no expectations from the people around him? He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. The sense of impasse still prevails, but now, a part of him is beginning to realize that maybe finding himself again is not an easy journey. But at the very least, he needs to start. He could not continue to live in a false cover. It is impossible to live forever with the image that everyone expects him to become. He needs to step out of that shadow, learn to face his emotions, not as a winner on the field, but as a normal human being with all his weaknesses and fears. Ethan came out of the toilet, his eyes a little brighter. Although he still didn't have answers to all the questions in his head, he felt something change in his mind. He is ready to face what he has overlooked, ready to accept emotions that have never been explored. It's a small step, but it's the first step on the road to finding yourself. He returned to his seat on the plane, feeling a little more stable. Although the flight continued to pass through the clouds, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of a new journey. A journey is not just about victories off the field, but about winning yourself. Ethan sat quietly in the plane seat, the faint light from the window shining on his face, highlighting the fatigue and tension that still lingered. He felt like he was at a crossroads, an important moment in his life that he could not ignore. During the flight, his mind seemed to be drawn between the past and the present, between the resounding victories and failures he never dared to face. The feeling of emptiness in his heart did not diminish, although there was a time when he thought he had found a way forward. He couldn't deny that despite everything, he still felt that he was missing something very important, as a part of himself that had been lost in the process of conquering all the heights. He recalled the days when he was a child, simple dreams, when he only wished to live a normal life with family and friends. But here he is, a man with so much to face and not knowing where to start. The thoughts came back to him. Even though he had achieved a lot, he still couldn't feel satisfied. He was too used to having to hide his true feelings, to be strong so that no one would see his inner weakness. But now, loneliness has become all too obvious. It felt like there was a big void in his soul that no award or honor could fill. His eyes closed for a moment, taking another deep breath. He thought about his family, about the friends he hadn't seen in a long time, about the moments he had missed during that long journey. He realized that he couldn't keep chasing the glory, but had to return to the true values, the things he had once valued, even though at the time it seemed too trivial for what he owned. His hand was unconsciously raised, gripping a small necklace around his neck. It was a gift that his mother had given, a symbol of love and attachment, a sweet memory, making him feel closer to himself. He wondered if he had moved too far away from simple things, sincere relationships, and then lost the real joy in life. His gaze stopped at the window, looking at the white clouds drifting under the deep blue sky. He didn't know where he was going, but one thing was clear, that he had to find a greater purpose in life. He had to face himself, accept the shortcomings, the fears that he had always avoided for a long time. He understands that the process won't be easy, but at least he's ready to start over. As the plane began to lose altitude and prepare to land, Ethan felt a little peace in his heart. He no longer wanted to rush. He wants to slow down, enjoy small moments, find joy in simple things. He is no longer a man who only lives to win on the field. You will return to being a real person, a person who can love yourself and those around you, not because of the recognition from the outside world, but because of your own inner worth. The plane landed, and Ethan got up, stepping out of the cabin. In that moment, he felt a new sense of freedom. He didn't know what the road ahead would be, but he was ready to walk, no longer just chasing distant goals. He will find himself again.